everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of the JavaScript Jabber podcast. This week on our panel, we have some guests, but before I introduce them, let's introduce the regulars. We have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, 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 coming at you live from Orem, Utah.
We also have Joachim Larson.
Hey, how you going?
And I'm Charles Max Wood from teachmetocode.com. Our guests this week are Lars Bak and Kasper Lund from Denmark.
That's correct. Thank you for inviting us.
They've worked on a few small projects like the Dart programming language and the V8. What is it? It's a virtual machine or a JavaScript implementation?
Are you referring to Dart or V8?
V8.
V8 is just a small JavaScript engine that makes JavaScript go sort of reasonably fast.
All right. Are the two connected in any way? I'm a little curious.
Absolutely not. Well, to be honest, we first did V8 and given our experience with JavaScript, we decided to do Dart. So they are sort of related.
Okay.
But they're not related on the implementation side.
No, it's completely separate.
So, I mean, you guys built your whole career basically on building great VMs. Is that right? How did you guys get started in that?
Oh, that goes all the way back to 86. You're probably not born at that point in time, but that's when I started building virtual machines for a programming language called Beta, which was a sort of a successor to what?
No, just the whole. If it was Google's first project, that's the whole thing where Google's programs are always in beta. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that was funny. There was a beta programming language that was a successor to Simula 67. That was my first virtual machine. And after that, I got a taste for it. It's very interesting to just tune the black box, making a programming language run fast. And then I joined the afterwards self project at Sun Microsystem Research Lab. And that was, at that point, the most interesting implementation project I could find, where they came up with very interesting ideas to make dynamic type languages run really fast. Came up with adaptive compilations, polymorphic inline caching, and stuff like that. That's like motherhood and apple pie when you do fast implementations today. And then I went to a startup in Silicon Valley where we did a system called StrongTalk, which is a variant of Smalltalk with optional static types. And then Java came along, and we decided in the startup, to spend most of our time doing a Java implementation. And
sorry, just a quick question. Sorry. So StrongTalk, it seems to me StrongTalk development was basically geared towards mobile and embedded platforms. Is that right?
That's not true. That is 4 projects later. That was a Smalltalk system called OOVM. That was my second Smalltalk project. No, StrongTalk was for desktop systems. Anyways, we did Hotspot and sold the startup to Sun Microsystems, and that became the default JVM for Java. And I still believe it's still running somewhere, even after it got sold to Oracle. So after that, I moved back to Denmark, and that's when I hooked up with Kasper. That was a student at Aarhus University.
Yeah, I got hired in at that point to help out on a new Java VM for mobile phones, and so we did that together here in Denmark. Before we decided that it was time to move away from JVMs and do something even cooler.
Right. So what prompted you to make the leap from Java JVMs to JavaScript?
Well, there was a few projects in between, but I think from my point, it was after implementing 2 Java virtual machines, it was sort of getting a little bit annoying. Doing the same thing over and over again, even though the second JVM was for mobile devices. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was a time to sort of leave big companies and try a startup. And that's where we did the embedded Smalltalk system called OOVM, which was a tiny Smalltalk system, multi-threaded, that ran in, say, a few hundred kilobytes of memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a very different system than at least the server system that Hotspot became. Mm-hmm. So this was a very simple Smalltalk execution environment for embedded devices. And it had some really nice properties, like you could service and change code on running devices, even if you were only connected through them to them via wireless connections and stuff like that. So it was kind of neat for small embedded devices.
Yeah, and that's also where we learned the lesson that if the programming language does not have curly braces, it's very hard to convince people to use it.
No kidding, right?
So
one generation later, it's very hard to get people to use curly braces.
I was going to say, says the JavaScript geek to the Ruby geek.
So we sold this small startup to a Swiss company called Esmatec, and we did a few projects, and it was time to do something else. And then Google called and asked if we wanted to do a new JavaScript engine for their new browser, Chrome. And we thought that was interesting. I checked, of course, the performance of the existing browsers at that point, and it was clear that it was easy to make something that was faster. So it seemed like a simple kind of thing to do. So that's how we started V8.
Right. So what is V8 written in? Is it in C or C++ or?
It's written in C++. The reason for we're using only a subset of C++, and it's mainly to have a programming language that supports abstract data types. If you use C, it's very complicated to change the implementation without rewriting the whole system.
In addition to being written mostly in C++, there's also a fairly big component of V8 today that is actually generating machine code. So essentially, fairly big chunks of V8 is hand-tuned machine code that we generate on the fly. Mm-hmm. So there is a sort of symbolic assembler written in C++ code that can emit binary instructions on the fly.
But generated from C++.
Generated from C++, but essentially you're sort of writing machine code through C++ that way.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a just-in-time compiler, or is it a little bit different?
Well, there's a just-in-time compiler in it, but there's also an adaptive compiler that does on-the-fly profiling of the application and detects hotspots in the program and then optimizes the hotspots.
Mm-hmm. So my understanding is that Node.js is actually based on V8. Is that correct?
That is completely correct.
So did you ever really intend for it to go toward the server, or are you surprised? And what's kind of your reaction to that?
We were surprised and we were happy at the same time.
Yeah.
Already early on in the V8 project, we decided to open source it, and we also want to have a clean API that was not tied to the browser. And I think that paid off in several respects. Right, first, it turns out that somebody shipped a phone based on V8 without us knowing it, and that was a Palm phones. And then Node.js came out on the server side, and it's pretty cool. And it basically, they just took V8 without us knowing it and integrating on the server side. Of course, over the last 2 years, they have wanted a bigger heap and stuff like that because they're running on the server side, and we've been trying to help them out in few areas. But that's pretty much it. So having an open API people can use certainly pays off.
Timing there was pretty amazing because, I mean, if you look at what Ryan himself said, that at the time he'd actually wanted to base it on something like Haskell or something else, and then he just basically read about V8 and then, I'll try that, and here we have Node.js. So if you guys were a little bit later or maybe even earlier, then we wouldn't have had Node.js, which is something to think about.
Yeah, and I think it's really changing the landscape of JavaScript, because I think before a lot of people just kind of thought about it in the browser, approached it from the standpoint of, Mozilla or Microsoft will manage our JavaScript VM, and so they just accepted whatever limitations were there. And now that it's available, and it's pretty darn fast in Chrome, and it's available in all these other environments, including on the server where you can just install Node. It really has kind of changed the landscape of JavaScript and what people can and will do with it.
I think one of the best things it's done in that regard is brought better architecture, because people, instead of always designing every project as a 20,000 long file, they design it as modules and build them together more.
Yeah, you can make that argument for just about any language if it's well thought out architecture. But it is interesting that I think Node kind of pushes you that way more than some other languages do.
Well, it just wasn't as feasible before. Like, I've used server-side JavaScript systems other than Node, where everything's a global, and it's like PHP, where you just include a file and everything goes into the global scope again. So Node really gave some good architecture there.
And you forget speed.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it fired the imagination so much. I mean, if you look at the growth in modules for Node on NPM, it's amazing, right? So it opened this door for a whole class of developers who were only working in the web browser at that point. or also class of developers who were maybe working server side, but they were doing it with other languages, and they were kind of like, JavaScript is a toy language. What are we going to do with this? And then Node gave them a reason to kind of really look at it.
Well, for us, it has been a little bit different because Node.js has not been our target when building V8. One thing I should mention here is that the main reason for open sourcing it early on was also to make sure that we could sort of entice the other browser vendors to make faster JavaScript engines, and I think that worked to a certain extent.
Oh, definitely.
Yep.
I mean, if you look at the development of Increase, I think when Chrome came out, it was about 3 times faster, something like that, than Firefox, or twice at least. And now we're getting at a point where not only is Chrome and V8 gotten faster, but the others are nearing a parity.
Right.
Maybe too much, but they're getting faster at least.
Well, and it's also interesting the fact that you open sourced it, so they can actually go and look and see what you did.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of a friendly competition in that we disclose everything we do, so people can take it if they want to, or just look at the ideas. One thing that's important is that we want to make the browser world better for everybody. Mm-hmm. Because it is a fact that the web application developers, they program against the lowest common denominator. So if you have a browser that's slow but has a big market share, application developers will program against that. And it doesn't really matter if one browser has the speed. Everybody needs to be beyond a certain bar before it matters.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Are you thinking of any browsers in particular, i.e. maybe IE?
Absolutely not.
Well, I mean, there's also that, and there's also just, now that we're getting into mobile, program for mobile devices, there's not only the question of having slower browsers, but also having more constrained environments where performance, means that much more.
Yeah.
Yeah, is V8 in Chrome for mobile?
Oh yeah, of course. It was also in the old browser for Android.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Of course, it's nice. And
it's also nice for us when we actually try to push the performance of V8. It actually has an impact on our own cell phones. It's kind of nice. You can feel the increase of speed there on the device you have in your pocket.
Is that something that drives you personally as a developer that you're actually improving your own tool chain in a way, your own experience of writing programs? I assume that you were developing in Smalltalk previously as well.
It matters a lot, right? The fact that Chrome, a new version of Chrome is coming out every 6 weeks is amazing as a developer, right? You're excited about speeding up a certain part of the browser, and a month after your code is out, used by millions of users. It's fantastic. It certainly helps the excitement going in the team.
And it keeps you very, very honest, right? If you push something that's great, some people will notice, and if you push something that's not as great, like if you actually introduce real bugs, you'll know too. It's very humbling.
So I've got a question for you guys about strict mode. Douglas Crockford said that if width was taken out of the language, that the language could be made much faster. So is V8 going to become faster for strict mode code?
Well, was that a VM implement again that said it could be faster?
The with statement in JavaScript
it doesn't. No, it doesn't actually.
It was a joke.
Matter.
So it does not matter at all.
So of course, V8 optimizes functions that do not contain with in a different way than the functions that do contain with. So as long as you're not using it, you're actually not paying for the feature.
We're just bailing out. Basically, the optimizations are ignored when you use with statement because you have a very dynamic scope and you have to do dynamic lookup of locals and so forth.
Okay. So whether or not
I have to ask my noob question real quick. What is a with statement? What does it do?
So with statement is a program construct that allows you to essentially put in any kind of object into your scope chain, so that when you have references to like local variables inside a scope, it will start out by asking that certain object if it has that property and use that as the variable essentially. Like, so you can add new objects to your scope that way. So it's very hard to control, and it's hard for a VM to optimize that well because you don't know the structure of the object that you're adding to your scope chain at all.
Yeah,
right.
And that object can change on the fly. So it basically boils down to you have to do a dynamic lookup whenever you're looking for something in your scope,
which of course is non-optimal.
Yes,
it's dog slow.
Is that a technical term? I think I'm going to start using that.
It is now,
Mr. Client. This is dog slow. I got to fix it.
But so So JavaScript, right, is an interesting scripting language. And one thing you guys have to understand is when we tuned V8 for JavaScript, we decided to sort of find a subset of JavaScript we could tune and make fast, right? There's still a lot of stuff, corners of JavaScript that's pretty slow. Like one is if you use the with statement. Another one is if you use the deleting a property in your program, and many of the optimization are turned off. So in essence, many of the JavaScript engines today, they only optimize for a subset of JavaScript.
Right. So what do you do then if you want to delete a property? Like, what would be the fast way to have that effect? To assign undefined?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So, I mean, so V8 and a lot of the other JavaScript engines, they optimize under certain assumptions. So usually they will treat your objects as essentially they are big hash tables all the time, but they will treat some of them in a smarter way where they assume that you're building real structured objects out of them. In that case, deleting them will actually turn them into hash tables again in some implementations. So it will not be slower than the implementation from 10 years ago, but it is dog slow.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm. So objects, right, in JavaScript are very different from objects in Java or Smalltalk or most other object-oriented languages in that's the only map you have. So often you use an object just like a map.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we had a long talk about that a few episodes ago. So one other question I have for you is how did you come up with the name V8? Because before I got into JavaScript, if you'd said V8, I would have said tomato juice.
Yeah, but
girl, normal people would say cars, but
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well, sort of.
That's not as funny. Come on, guys.
Hey, come on. The way it works is that
V7 was taken.
I was sitting with Kasper here, and we're trying to create the name for the source repository. We need something short, and we sort of knew it was called Chrome, and under the Chrome, we need a big engine, so we called it V8.
Oh, there you go. That makes sense.
And it was short.
It was short.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was pretty much it.
That's actually one of the biggest challenges in computer science, coming up with that initial name for your directory.
Yes.
Yep.
It's sort of interesting at Google, right? We can maintain the internal code name on the outside as well, which is cool. So it stayed V8.
Oh, nice. So the other question I have, and this is going to lead us into talking about Dart. What prompted you to go and create something like Dart? Now that you've been playing with JavaScript for a while, were there things about the language you didn't like, or did you just want a little bit different challenge?
Yeah, V8. Well, first of all, you cannot continue working on the same stuff forever, right? So we had to do something new. The second one is that it was also very clear that web applications were getting bigger and bigger. Inside Google, right, we have like Gmail and Docs and other big apps. And it's basically many, many lines of JavaScript. And it's very hard to maintain big applications in JavaScript. So many big companies like Google, they have sort of, they put some structure on top of JavaScript just to be able to maintain the many lines of code. And we have the JS closure compiler at Google, so you can actually annotate JavaScript with pseudo types, and you can check that, and you can do tree shaking and stuff like that. So it was clear that JavaScript was sort of reaching the limit of how big applications you can write in. At least that's how we saw it. And so we were looking at coming up with a better language that's more declarative and that will be easier to maintain if you had big applications. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we could solve two real problems with JavaScript. One is the startup time, which is pretty pathetic right now, and then the peak performance. Of course, we want to make it faster too. The way that JavaScript is started up in the browser, you read in source code, and you have to read in all the source code before you really can get started. Mm-hmm. And that also means that if you start up a big web application, it can take half a second or more to load the application. And that's just too long in my book. So we wanted to...
Just
once again?
Is that from cache, or are you taking network traffic into account? Or do you mean just even if it's from cache, it's going to take a long time?
That's even if you take it just from the cache. If you have a large body of JavaScript, it takes a while to parse and set up and get ready to execute. And so we wanted a programming language that supports snapshots, so you could do instant startup despite you had a big application. That was one thing. And the other one was that we want to make sure you could have faster peak performance. And Dart is much more structured in terms of objects cannot change on the fly in terms of structure, and that allows us to get better performance. So we envision that when it comes to startup performance, we'll get a factor of 10 compared to JavaScript, and the peak performance, it should be at least twice as fast.
Yeah.
So one question I have then is, there isn't a Dart VM in my browser, or at least I don't think there is.
Well, then download what we call Dartium. We have a build of Chrome with a native Dart VM inside it.
So are you hoping that this is going to be adopted across other browsers? Or is there some kind of shim that allows you to run Dart over the top of JavaScript?
Well, there's two questions. One is, could we convince the other browser vendors to use the Dart VM? Hopefully so. But we cannot make their calls, right? They have to want it themselves.
Right.
But we have a translator that translates Dart source code into JavaScript, so it will be compatible with existing JavaScript engines. It's very important to note here that we are not interested in fragmenting the browser market at all, right? We just want to make sure that we get better system performance and we get a programming language that's easier for big applications. So we're very serious about making sure that a Dart program can run nicely on top of an existing browser.
Of course, we're also making the VM available with a nice embedding API, and it's fully open source, and it's out there and being developed in the open. So hopefully, people like the Node.js effort and people involved in that, or similar people will find this and use it for something else that we haven't imagined yet. So at least that was one of the very positive things about the V8 project, was that we managed to get people to use it without us knowing or trying to control it. That was really, really nice to see.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask is, do you see maybe Dart going the same way that V8 did in something like Node.js, or maybe somebody, using it on a phone and creating a mobile VM that people can, do something other than web stuff with?
Certainly. We have an embedding API, so people can just start using it for various purposes. We think that's fine. One thing you can ask us is, what are you trying to do with Dart? So certainly getting these extra properties in when you do web application is nice, but also we think that if we want to improve the web platform moving forward, right, innovation is very important. And our small project Dart is trying to innovate in the browser area, making a new language, trying to make it more efficient for the programmers to do applications and so on. So that's certainly our plan.
Right.
To me, just to kind of go from that, it seems to me like that Google has kind of maintained an almost anti-JS position for quite a while, both in terms of Google Web Tools and their Java to JS compiler and stuff like that. Isn't it simply just a case of Google not really wanting to learn JavaScript?
That's simply not true, right? We are investing heavily in JavaScript, right? V8 is a good example on that. We are actually trying to make it as fast as possible and as usable as possible. We've done great developer tools for JavaScript. So that's not true. On the other hand, it's also important that you try new things. So I don't see a conflict between supporting JavaScript 100% and also at the same time trying something new.
So how does Dart compare? Because you said that you have a Dart VM that just runs Dart natively, but there's also the Dart to JavaScript translator. Where do you see Dart in comparison with something like CoffeeScript that kind of gives you, a clean API, easy to use, that translates down to JavaScript?
So the Dart translation is somewhat different than the CoffeeScript translation. CoffeeScript is a fairly sort of thin veneer around JavaScript. And that, it does have some advantages because it's a fairly simple translation process. The disadvantage is, of course, that the pitfalls of JavaScript are still very, very visible to CoffeeScript programmers.
Right.
So all the warts and all the areas of JavaScript that you're trying to avoid as a programmer are still something you have to worry about when writing in CoffeeScript. In Dart, when we're translating to JavaScript, we put in the extra effort of actually building a more complicated compiler that is doing more translation work to make sure that we have the same semantics so we preserve the simpler Dart semantics, even when compiled to JavaScript. So avoiding some of these words for you.
Sorry, how about from JavaScript to Dart?
Well, JavaScript is fairly flexible, right? So you add properties on the fly. You don't do that in Dart. In Dart, you create a map and you use that for adding information and stuff like that. So if you're translating from JavaScript to Dart, I think you'll get a fairly slow system out of it.
I mean, you could say that if you're writing your JavaScript in a very, very structured way, in a very sort of idiomatic way, at least for some people, it might be possible to translate back to Dart, but it's still pretty hard to recognize if you're writing in that style and if you're very consistent in your way of doing it.
So that being said, it seems like there is a translation process from Dart to JavaScript. So how heavily did you have to influence Dart from JavaScript in order to keep it that kind of compatible?
It was when we started the language design, we wanted it to be translated into JavaScript. So it's clearly in our head all the time. And we had to sort of not do certain language constructs because we knew it could not be implemented as fast on a JavaScript engine. Sort of an example on that would be non-local returns, which are very handy. I don't know if you know them from Smalltalk, but non-local return can skip several frames on the stack when returning, and the only way to implement that in JavaScript is by using exceptions, and they're really slow. So the constructs like that we have eliminated to make sure that the translated version of Dart to JavaScript can run fast.
So if I were to write a program in Dart and translate it to JavaScript versus writing that same program in JavaScript, and let's say I ran it through the Google Closure compiler, would I end up with faster JavaScript at the end?
It really depends on what you're doing. I think there's a lot of code where the output would not be faster, but it would be saner. So, for instance, Dart semantics involves doing like array bounds checks on access to arrays. JavaScript certainly does not. So, essentially, the code that we produce is sometimes there's a small price to pay for that, and sometimes there's not. Like our compiler is also capable of doing more for you long term, like doing some of the inlining and all those things in a more structured way than the Closure compiler can do. So it really depends on what you're writing, I would say.
But certainly our goal is to make sure that even though you have a Dart program, the speed on top of a JavaScript engine should be comparable to if you wrote that in JavaScript.
Why would browser vendors be more likely to accept Dart than something like a native client, for example, another Google project?
Well, native client does not interact well with the DOM, right? It's sort of in a separate space, running its own sandbox, and native client is great.
I was going to say that that's something that could be overcome, couldn't it?
Maybe. So Dart is completely sort of integrated with the DOM, and you can operate on the DOM like if you use JavaScript. So I think for building web applications, this is much easier using Dart compared to using the native client system, right?
Yeah, but it's hard to speculate on why other browser vendors would want to pick up technology and why they would not pick up other stuff. It's really hard.
The history of browser scripting has been kind of ironic. I mean, we've had JavaScript, which people ignored for a long time, and they wanted to do everything in Java, and then now JavaScript is going everywhere where Java kind of wanted to go. What is kind of, why isn't the JVM basically the heart of the browser scripting language? Why isn't there a DOM integration with JVM?
There's many reasons for that, I would say.
Is it heavily encumbered in terms of patents and who holds the rights and stuff like that?
No, I think this is mostly a technology issue. JavaScript was there, right? It was in all browsers, and it sort of slowly grew and became more important in the browsers. And with the last 5 years of work on performance, suddenly you can write big apps in JavaScript. So that's a big issue. I think the integration between JavaScript and the browser was really important. Java was never integrated well with the browser. It always had this applet window. The app was running inside, so it looked more like an appendix to the browser instead of an integral part of the browser. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that seemed more to do with the fact that people, kind of didn't really like using HTML as a UI. We had a long period where people were using XML and all other kinds of things for doing UI, SketchUps. But, I think
there's also another issue I like to mention. That is, right, web developers, right? They're going for instant gratification. right? It means that you can basically change HTML and do a reload, and you have your new app up running right away. And when you have a scripting language like JavaScript, it's the same, right? You could embed JavaScript into HTML, and when you change the code, reload, you'll get instant gratification when programming. And that's extremely powerful. You never had that with Java, right? Java was always about editing the code, running JavaC, and then restarting the application.
The reason that I ask is, of course, that due to, I'm sure, your work with performance on Java, the JVM now has a very rich ecosystem of Groovy and Scala and Clojure and all that. And there's basically the opportunity that people can write in whatever kind of flavor of language that they want and have it run everywhere. And I'm just kind of thinking now that we're in this situation with ECMAScript is being, they want to have all these strange constructs, and you guys are doing Dart, and there was the whole thing with the native client. Couldn't we see a situation where there's a generalized VM that other languages can build on within the browser?
Oh, you want to do a multi-language VM?
I'm just wondering why that path wasn't kind of gone down.
Well, the problem is it doesn't work. Several languages, I'm not going to mention names now again, but several companies have tried to do multi-language VMs. And the problem is that when you come to the bottom of it, there's always a compromise you have to make. Like if you're implementing C# or Java, you will have basic types, right? You have ints and doubles and longs and what have you as the core part of the execution. Whereas in JavaScript, you have you have objects everywhere. And it's very hard to reconcile these two worlds. So if you do a VM based on basic types, it's pretty much impossible to make it run fast if you want to implement JavaScript. And the other way around, basically.
But that's a trade-off then the developers are free to make, right? They can choose if they want to have a quick implementation or they want to have a good performance, same like, not naming names here, but like Ruby and PHP or whatnot.
Yeah, well, you also have to be careful. So we're working in a company, right? And when you start on sort of multi-language projects, it sometimes turns into this research project that takes many years to do, right? We were a small group here in Aarhus that had to do V8, and focusing on only one language had the benefit we could easier reach the target. So and that's pretty much it.
From the outside, it seems to me that right now JVM actually does give developers that freedom where they can choose if they want to write in JSON or they want to do JRuby or Scala or Clojure or standard Java.
Yeah, but these languages you're mentioning here, they are using basic types. So I will still say again, if you even with the new Java, if you try to make an implementation of JavaScript, it'll be falling into the category we talked about before, dog slow. It's just not fast.
So it's like, I mean, that makes sense. If you want to get the fastest JavaScript, you have to write a VM for JavaScript. If you want to get the fastest Ruby, you've got to write an engine for Ruby, and you can because
JRuby is faster than normal Ruby.
Yeah, but that has more to do with the implementation than the actual, like the way that MRI Ruby is implemented. It has more to do with some of that than it does to do with the fact that it's written on the JVM versus written in C and compiled.
So kind of like the difference between writing a web server that's using event-based serving and one that's using thread-based.
Right, in the sense that they're using different paradigms to manage different processes and issues, and so there are different issues between the two VMs and the way that they're put together.
So a question I've got while we're on this topic is, so Google has started Golang. They've started native client. Now they're starting Dart. It seems like at least two of them are definitely direct competitors between native client and Dart. Like they're trying to serve the same purpose, get the browser super fast and make it easy for people to integrate. And then Golang, it doesn't look like there'd be any problem with putting that in the browser. And I was kind of hoping originally when I heard about it that would be the direction it would go. So why are there so many different directions that Google is going in right now?
Oh, well, I would say that we should just be happy that we're in a company that invests so much in programming languages so that programmers can get the best choice. I don't see a problem at all. And also, I think it would be sad if we sort of sat down and only stuck with one language.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of adoption, right? Like I can't use Dart until Firefox implements it, right? Who cares about IE? There's a lot of applications where you can just focus on browsers.
Let's stop again. Didn't we just talk about there was a translator to JavaScript, or did we miss that part?
What was that?
We can still translate Dart to JavaScript.
So you can run Dart.
You can run it today. So this is not true what you're saying.
But not getting the full benefit of it.
Well, but it still runs.
Okay.
That they would probably argue that you could.
Also, we don't really see Dart and native client as competing technologies. They're very, very different. Dart is a scripting programming language that is very immediate. You write your code and you read out your page and it's right there. And native client is a different kind of technology, and it's great for translating C code to something that runs in your browser. It's very different at the core of it.
So my question is, what do you see people doing with Dart these days, generally?
Well, first of all, Dart is not a full product, right? We sent out a technology preview sort of in the fall last year, and we're working hard on making it better. Basically, we can see from the inside that people have started building applications, web applications using Dart, and this is still the target. So hopefully soon we can send out a robust version, an SDK you can use to do web apps with. That's basically our goal. We want to improve the way you do web apps.
Mm-hmm. So nobody's actually using it in production yet that you know of?
Not that I know of, but it's a technology preview, so I don't think it's the right time to build products on top of Dart.
Right. Yeah. If any of our listeners are using it, I would be really curious to see what you're doing with it. So if you're using it, then by all means, leave a comment on javascriptjabber.com. And you can probably also let Lars and Kasper know so that they, I think they'd be interested since they don't have an exact example of what people are doing with it at this point.
Not on the outside, right? But one thing, we've got a lot of feedback from the community using Dart, and so far it's very good. The feedback. People are mostly trying it out, making small apps, but not for sort of commercial use yet.
Right.
So is there a package manager that is gained traction in the community for Dart, or is it still just kind of ad hoc right now?
Currently, there's none. If you stay put for a few weeks, you'll see one.
Oh, nice.
Are you working on one, or do you know someone who is?
We're working on making one, a simple one, and it'll be out in the open source repository. So if somebody has one faster than us, submit it, and we'll get into the workspace.
Cool.
Just make sure you don't put your users table public facing.
Oh man, you had to go there, didn't you? All the Node people are crying for a whole day or 3.
Anyway, let's pretend it didn't happen. Actually, we're sorry.
Yeah.
80. You guys have a pretty big team. You guys, I hear, have about 80 developers working on the language itself, and you have a very active bug tracker. And how do you kind of balance the long-term goals and what people are clamoring for in this tracker?
Okay, well, you're seeing more resources than I'm doing here from my side, so I don't know where you get your numbers from, but they're somewhat inflated. But we have a good sized team working on Dart, but it's not only the language design. So we only have a few people looking at the language. We've hired in Gilad Braka, that did the Java specification before. He wrote up a specification for Dart, but we're doing a lot of different things in the group. We're doing a programming environment, so it's based on parts of Eclipse, so you can do structured development using this editor. We're doing a translator to JavaScript, we talked about, and a virtual machine. And we integrated Dart into the Chrome browser. So that's a lot of different projects. And also on the open source site, you can see that we have started to do a little bit of server code as well. So we can run Dart on the server side if you want to.
So and another thing that we spend a lot of time on is actually trying to get the most of the and the best value out of the feedback that we do get from the community. And so you see a lot of us interacting with people on the issue tracker and through code reviews and working with people and not just from Google. So it could be that your team size is pretty accurate if you count people in not working for Google too.
So the interesting part is here we decided very early on to open source it. And we, in the Dart team, we work exactly the same way as in the V8 team. Whenever we have a change list to the repository, it'll be sent out in the open right away. So we do everything in the open, and hopefully that'll benefit the community.
Yeah,
so regarding language features and stuff and feedback, I hear that there's a lot of desire for mix-ins and traits. Is that something that you're thinking about, or is it just that's not going to happen?
Sure, there's a lot of requests for different language features, and the problem is that you have to be careful not to add too much into the language, right? We already have interfaces and classes, so if you also add mix-ins, right, it's yet another way of combining code. So we're trying to be careful not to just to add new constructs in. We like to keep the language very simple, and right now it is still very simple and it's sufficient for writing web apps. So we're trying to be careful. There's also people that want to have ways of doing tail call elimination and stuff like that, but I don't think it's very useful to have in the programming language. We're trying to keep it very simple so that with a background in Java or JavaScript, you can be productive within a few hours.
All right. Well, I need to start wrapping this up. After we end the podcast, if you guys want to keep talking, that's fine. I'll just leave it recording, and we'll just post anything else that you have to say afterward in some bonus content, because it sounds like Joachim has a few more questions, but I have an appointment in about 15 minutes. So
that's okay.
What we usually do at the end of the podcast, and I should have emailed you and told you this, but I've been swamped just preparing for the podcasts and preparing for a couple of talks. I'm speaking at a conference this week, and I'm an alternate speaker at one next week. So I've been just trying to get all that together. But what we do is we usually pick some items. It can be anything from TV shows to programming tools, just things that we like, things that make our life better, things that are kind of interesting or fun, and, just share them with the community. So what I'll probably do is just have the regular panelists go first and share their picks, and that way you can think about what you want to tell us that you like and tell people to go try out. So, AJ, what are your picks this week?
I love bloggers. They make my life easier. I just love it when people write documentation for something for me to find to get myself out of a fix. I was working on...
the railroad?
Yes, I was working on the railroad, and there were some shared workers there, and there were some desktop notifications there, and there was some session storage there. And I was trying to figure it all out. That's right. So there's just a couple blogs I found that really helped me out. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head, but, just Google searching. And so I'm very grateful for all you stalwart people that are helping the rest of us get smarter.
All right. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Joachim, what are your picks?
Well, I've been kind of, going into the whole, self-improvement thing or whatnot. So I'm going to take classcentral.com. It's class-central. And it's basically a collection of free courses that you can attend from MIT and from many other universities that are offering free courses. And I think Yehuda, he touched on that also a few episodes ago, but I don't remember. But anyway, classcentral.com. And then also Memrise, which is, it's been buzzed a lot about, and it's actually pretty interesting. I've been living in Thailand for quite a few years now, and it's the first time that I actually really gotten serious learning the Thai alphabet, because it's a dog. It's got 88 characters. What the fuck? All right. Anyway.
That's Memrise, MEMRISE.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll go next. For those of you who don't know, I'm a huge podcast junkie. I listen to podcasts all day long. And I recently found one. It's called This Is Your Life. And it is by Michael Hyatt, who used to be the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishing, which is the largest Christian publishing company here in the United States. I think it might be the largest Christian publishing company in the world. I'm not sure. But anyway, he's I think he left his position there, and he's just out speaking and doing training and things. Anyway, This Is Your Life podcast. He goes into a lot of things as far as, improving your life in different ways. And, he usually has like 10 things that help you with whatever the topic is. And he's only put out 3 episodes so far, but every single one of them has been worth it. And I need to go back and listen to them again because they're just that good with managing your life and things like that. So just a terrific podcast. And then the other thing is my wife bought me for our anniversary, which is on Sunday, a Fitbit, which is this little device that you carry around with you, and it tracks your activity and things like that. And it's been really nice. It actually tracks your sleep too. So now I know it takes me about 6 or 7 minutes to fall asleep, and that I need to get more of that, more sleep. So, but it's really cool. It also tracks like your activity when you go to the gym, and it says, you know, you were really active for this many minutes, and you were somewhat active for this many minutes, and you were sedentary for most of the day. So, you know, really interesting stuff, and I've really been enjoying that. And now we'll go ahead and put our guests on the spot. Lars, do you have any picks? Anything that you've been playing with or enjoying lately?
Yes, and I'm surprised you have not mentioned it yet. You should go to dartlang.org and try out our new language and then post your feedback. It's actually very cool. People have religious attitudes towards programming languages, but they should try out Dart and see how it is.
That's true.
Pretty cool.
You're starting a new religion.
Kasper.
Yeah, I am. I have a kind of different thing. I recently installed a piece of software on my phone that makes it go silent at night, and that's great.
Ooh.
Like at 10 in the evening, it will go silent, and it will turn on volume again the next morning. That's a blessing. That works really well. It comes highly recommended.
What's it called?
Silent Sleep.
Yeah, I think something like that. Silent Sleep for Android. There are a bunch of them, and I think they all do the trick. Just turn it silent at night. Be better.
So my only question is if I'm out late, is there any way for me to tell it stay quiet unless my wife calls?
Yes, of course. You can put in all these blacklists and whitelists if you care to.
All right, I like that. Wife, whitelist. Mom, blacklist.
You can also do the inverse if that is better.
Oh, yeah. Congratulations with your anniversary, Chuck.
Oh, thanks. It's been a long 7 years. I'm just kidding. My wife is a wonderful person, and she puts up with a lot. As you can probably guess, since I do so many podcasts and stuff, and I've been working a lot lately. So anyway, I just want to thank you guys for coming again, Lars and Kasper. It's really, really awesome to see people kind of advancing the state of the art with things like this. And I often wonder what JavaScript would look like if you could kind of reboot it and optimize it for how people use the web now. And so I'm really, really curious to see where Dart goes from here. We are in iTunes, so if any of our listeners are trying to find us in iTunes, just do a search for JavaScript. We are the first podcast that comes up. You can also search for JavaScript Jabber, and we will definitely come up. While you're there, leave us a review. Really, really appreciate that. And you can also subscribe from the website. Just go to javascriptjabber.com. We also appreciate comments, so if you have anything you want to add, thoughts that you have on Dart or anything like that, go check it out at dartlang.org. And also leave a comment here and let us know that you checked it out and what you thought, because I'm really curious to see what people think of this new language.